Hello Dream Team, and welcome back to episode 4 of the AMP podcast. I'm joined by Dan Price.
Hello.
This episode we're going to do a real overview of nutrition, almost as a precursor to follow-up episodes, because it's such a massive topic and there are so many different aspects to nutrition that we want to cover. So what we're going to start by doing is just kind of laying out the AMP stall in terms of the way that we approach coaching generally and how that reflects on the way that we approach nutrition, and then we can deep dive into some of the content that is more specific to the kind of coaching that you do, and give people an insight into, I suppose, what it'd be like to kind of work with you for people who haven't worked with a nutritionist before. So I think, first of all, in terms of nutrition, one of the things that I would say is the same as exercise and the same as mindset is that it is quite highly individual. And I think we can obviously go into the detail around why that is with nutrition and what is individual about nutrition and diet. But generally speaking, as an approach, what we try to do is take each individual as a separate case study and say, what is actually food nutrition for you, and what purpose does it serve, and how can we tweak those things in order to actually achieve the goals that you want, but also how do we take into context your life and the things that influence the decisions you make or the resources you have access to. Like, all of these things are really relevant, and they don't sound nutritionally at all. They don't sound like nutritional science in any way. They're actually far more practical and fairly rational, logical things that involve, I suppose, organising your lifestyle. And that's very much the way that we kind of AMP approach coaching generally with exercise as well, is that there is this underpinning scientific background to what we're trying to do, so that we know that whatever methods we're trying to implement are more likely to work. And then we're just looking at implementation after that. We're just looking at, well, okay, the textbook says X, but if we put the client or the person at the very center of that decision-making process, actually sometimes you find yourself going against sometimes what the textbook says in order to make it actually fit for that individual. Is that sort of fair? I mean, fair assessment of how it works in nutrition as well as?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's actually a good analogy with the training, where what might be appropriate for one person in terms of training is not going to be appropriate for someone else, even though the principles of training still apply to both. I think that it's actually easier for people to understand that in exercise realms, because if someone came to you for training, they understand that they're probably not going to be training in the same way as a professional athlete, or they're not going to be starting on a really advanced strength training program. They know they're going to start with kind of some fundamentals and things that they can do at that level and then look to build on it. Whereas with nutrition, I think because there's constantly so much information about this is the best way to eat or this thing's terrible for you, that people are seeing those things and thinking that should be applied to them. When actually in reality, just as you're kind of alluding to there, some of those more practical changes, just starting by nudging a little bit closer to some of these habits, a little bit further away from these, is where we need to be. Just in the same way as when you start training, you might be trying to just get into the habit of being in the gym, or trying to get a little bit stronger, starting with some lighter weights, working up. That's all we need to really do with nutrition. But I think there's more of perception about, well, this is bad, this isn't perfect, this isn't eating completely clean, which really would be a comparison to doing some kind of really intense training with all the mobility work, all the cardio stuff, all the fitness stuff, all the resistance training all mapped out, when actually for most people are more willing to kind of build into that.
Yeah. And because I think the question that people really want to answer is around nutrition, is what should I be eating? And I think basically what we've alluded to there, and certainly what we will talk about now, is that depends. And then you're just having a conversation on what does that depend on, really. And I think that's where we should almost start for people, so that if that is the question that you do want answered from this podcast, and just generally from your sort of searches with nutrition around what to eat, starting with what is your goal is quite a good place to start, because depending on that, the answers to the question of what should I eat do change a little bit. So we'll come on to that in time. I think we'll come on and talk about that in this podcast, and hopefully provide some clarity around that for people, so that you can get a little bit closer to that answer, even if they aren't working one-to-one with a coach. But let's start by talking about the process of coaching, because I think that's something that people do try and do nutrition a lot on their own, and can make a great deal of progress with that. But there is an entire industry, and a growing industry out there, of coaches and experts and nutritional scientists who are putting information out there and saying, look, actually this is a better way of doing it. So to give people an insight into what that might be like to work with you, can you take us through kind of what the experience is like and what your process is with clients?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's probably easiest to almost imagine kind of two different ways of coaching first, because there's kind of two different ways. And one is to already have a philosophy, quite a rigid approach, an idea of what either healthy eating is or a weight loss approach or whatever it is. To have that idea, and then when you start working with a client, it's about how do you sort of shoehorn that client into that approach. So that's kind of one way of doing it. That's not the way I go about doing it. The way I would rather do it is start with what the client's currently doing and what their goal is, and start with their current diet and then make changes to that to bring it more in line with what we want. So it's kind of reverse engineering it. It's starting with what they're already doing. So as you said earlier, with the kind of client-centric approach. It's like, let's start where we are and then keep in mind the principles we're trying to get closer towards and then make those changes, rather than the other approach is to go, this is the exact way we want to eat, regardless of how you're currently eating. We're now going to change everything over to this.
That approach is it. I mean, that's a lot more sensitive to what we understand about behaviour change.
Yeah, and I think as well, in truth, it's ultimately what the difference is between coaching, working with another person, versus just following a diet. Because you could go on the internet and dig out a nutrition plan from anyone online, or buy a book, a low carb book or an intermittent fasting book, or any of these other things that will give you that kind of shoehorned approach, where it's like, this, if you do this, you'll get results. And then regardless of what you're currently doing, if you can fit into that mold, that's an approach that might work. So that's kind of fine, and I'm sure people have, getting good results with that. I think the success rate is varied, but then by the time someone's coming for a coach, you would imagine they maybe have tried some of those things, and actually what we're looking for then is a bespoke approach to that person. And so that's why, for me, I think if a coach is still trying to shoehorn into an existing method, it's probably not much better than just following a method you found in a magazine or online or something. Whereas what we have the advantage of is actually being able to have a conversation with the client and then making the program around them.
Yeah, because I think accounting for preference when it comes to food, people have, everyone has a love of certain foods. So there you're not talking about just a cold, rational decision around, I should be eating this because I want to lose weight. You're talking about an emotional attachment to food. You're talking about an enjoyment of eating. And so having that ability to say, how are you finding the diet? I'm finding everything fine except this one bit. I can't let go of X food. I can't stop snacking on X. That you don't get that from, finding as you say, a perfectly good diet approach, a system-based approach. It's just saying you should just be eating this, and that there's no additional support with what that food might be providing for someone, whether it's helps with stress, whether it helps relaxing in the evening, whether it's something they do socially. I know that's something you touch on a lot in terms of social calories, is what you call it, social foods. But that sort of stuff as well with coaching is that real-time feedback, I suppose, and interaction with yourself.
Yeah, massively. And you touched on preference there. Preference is always important for any nutritional change. It's particularly important for time-sensitive goals. So that might be something like weight loss, or it might be something like building muscle in a kind of more of a phase period of time, where deliberate weight gain or these kind of things. It's like, if you're doing something for a change over time, it doesn't necessarily need to be sustainable forever, but it's probably going to be more of a deviation from what you normally do, because we're trying to bring about change. So with weight loss, for example, that should only ever really be a short-term intervention to bring about change, and then the long-term focus should be on maintaining a healthy diet, healthy body weight, all the rest of it. So then when you look at that short period of time when you're pursuing weight loss, what's important is that you actually achieve it. That's the main thing. You don't want to be stuck in the forever diet, as I would say, which is where people are trying to lose weight for literally years and decades without losing weight, Because then what you just end up with is a fairly poor quality diet where there's periods of restriction, periods of overeating, swings between quality and lack of quality, and that kind of diet fatigue of feeling like you're dieting. So that's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to get in and get out successfully with weight loss, for example. And in that case, when we think about willpower, which it will require, my view on it is very much that willpower can almost be seen as a sort of pie chart. And I want my client to be able to split their willpower really across only the things that actually matter for that goal. Whereas when you get shoehorned into one of these other diet types or something that's just not been based around you, there will be rules and systems in there that might work as a broad brushstroke. But you may end up being like, oh, this plan's not letting me have my tea with a couple of sugars in it in the morning, which is, I really need that, and it's killing my willpower because I can't have it. And it's like, well, actually, that's not really pivotal to the outcome of that goal. If we know that that's really important to you, of course we can get that into the plan and we can tweak something else elsewhere. So I never want people to be wasting willpower on kind of arbitrary rules that actually aren't getting them anything. So that's where the coaching can come in, because you can actually almost have a sort of value system. What's most important that we keep in this diet? Is it this particular food? Is it the ability to go out with your partner on the weekend for a meal? And let's protect those things, and then let's barter a bit more on some of the things that are, well, I get this takeaway on a Wednesday because I haven't got anything in the house. It's like, okay, that can be addressed more easily because that's just organization. We can get other swaps for that. We don't want to tackle, the value of you spending time with your partner. If that's something that's super important, you're going to need to be able to keep doing that throughout the process to be able to stick to it. So it just allows that ability to go, let's focus on what we can change, what we're willing to change, where we can get the biggest return on investment.
Yeah, that level of personal support is enormous, isn't it? Because there's an accountability aspect to coaching which you can't exactly replicate elsewhere. There's sometimes a social pressure with group-based approaches to nutrition, such as kind of Weight Watchers, that kind of turning up as a group and doing weekly weigh-ins. But there's a big difference between, I think, the social pressure or the pressure, as you mentioned, of having a structured plan there is a set of rules that implicitly says if you break these rules in some way, you have not stuck to the diet and you have failed. And I think the leap that we all would make is the more you break the rules, the more you've broken the diet, the less you have succeeded, the more you have failed. I think it's hard to get away from that idea, but by the sounds of it, in terms of what you're talking about, when someone's able to interact with you, you're able to keep that in check beforehand and say, actually, if we tweak these things, I suppose it's guidance. There's a guidance element to it.
Yeah, I would probably go three areas that coaching gives that are the main areas. So the first one we touched on there, which is preference or customization. You can make it really bespoke to the individual. The second one is accountability, which is what you're talking about there, which is, okay, if someone's actually overseeing what I'm doing, a lot of my clients will be sending in food pictures or just touching, I had this, what should I get from this restaurant, or what, little touch base like that. It's an accountability aspect, which is really important. The third one is what I would call context, or a second pair of eyes on something, a rational mind in what sometimes can be an irrational situation, which is, the scale weight's gone up today. I've been trying so hard, I don't know what's wrong, it's not working. And then just being able to have that conversation where you can pull back from it, go through many of the reasons why that might be, that aren't because you've failed and gone off track, just that's very natural that we have these fluctuations, reminding the person of how far they've come in the journey, the successes they've had, and just talking them through what we need to keep chipping away at and where we're likely to be if we can continue doing it. That, for me, is the biggest value of coaching, because my philosophy is this: when someone starts to feel like they're failing, they're very close to actually failing and stopping. But because you start building that negative momentum of, this went wrong, that went wrong, just disbelief comes in, it's over. Whereas my whole approach is to try and make it difficult for my clients to feel like they're failing. If something goes wrong, we can have a conversation about it. If someone does have, even if it is a weekend that goes completely off awry, and you can't really actually justify why it probably has set them back a little bit, just say, but it's like, in reality, okay, that's hit pause on the weight loss for like 2 days. Is that a real problem in the great scheme of how long we're looking at doing this? 3 months, 4 months, how much progress we've made, where we're going? Is it that bad to hit pause for 2 days, enjoy yourself, then come back at it with a positive mindset? It doesn't really matter at all, does it? It's like, so you're going to be at your goal weight 2 days later than you thought you were. So as long as we can always pull it back, that is ultimately what allows people to stay on track long enough to achieve it. And for me, that's probably the most important of all of them.
Yeah, so you can provide a perspective that's not tainted by because when you're in a situation and you're emotionally involved in it, it's very hard to get that kind of clarity of oversight, isn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, there's also an aspect where you're talking there, I was thinking, okay, this sounds like there's a lot of support, there's this interaction, there's a sort of psychological, emotional relationship piece there in terms of what coaching provides, but also in terms of expertise as well, because people are at different levels with their nutritional knowledge, their nutritional habits, the expectations for what their diet is going to be able to do, the demands they may be placing on themselves, whether it's regards to time, professional obligations and performance levels, or whether it's actually physical performance. You know, people are really just getting going in terms of changing their lifestyle and becoming healthier and getting going with exercise and getting things started. Some people at the other end of that spectrum who actually want their diet to be optimized and tweaked. And you know, I think maybe the reason we haven't focused on it just until now is because it's the obvious one, the one that gets talked about maybe more, is the expertise, is that knowledge, and being able to say, actually, once we've gone through that aspect of this is going to be possible to stick to, this is what's appropriate for your goal and situation, you are then down to, actually, this food is going to be better than this one. And there are times when it can be very confusing in terms of nutrition.
Yeah, massively. There's different client types wherein nutritional expertise are more appropriate or more necessary in the kind of nuance that you're talking about there. But the funny thing is, even when you're working in very practical ways with clients that might seem, oh, this is, you know, we're ultimately talking about eating less, right? That has to still come from a place of actually understanding the biochemistry and understanding why that's the case, why it is that it's not, oh, well, actually, what if we just try and keep your insulin low or whatever? Or if you don't understand why it is that it can be as simple as trying to reduce these, we don't then go down these rabbit holes with the client about looking at these kind of different approaches and all this stuff. So I think we've always discussed this over time, Russ, of coaching together. When you understand a subject, your translation of it becomes simpler and more reduced. When you hear a coach or anyone else trying to explain a topic and it's very detailed and it's very, very minutiae detail, it's often because they're explaining to themselves that they understand that topic, rather than what does the person need to actually hear? What's the diluted version of this? And so certainly for weight loss, the biggest education piece I guess I'm doing with clients is I'm trying to pull them away from like majoring in the minor, from being in the weeds about, do I need this supplement or this thing, or should I be fasting, or should I be cutting out this thing, and trying to pull them back to some of the bigger picture things that are maybe being missed, some of the bigger rocks like social calories, like alcohol, like snacking frequency, just these kind of things. Another area where I guess, if you want to call it expertise, but certainly specialism would come in, is just trying to get the original approach right. Now, for weight loss, that might be fairly straightforward. If someone definitely wants to lose weight, they have a good amount of weight to lose, fine. But often, particularly when I'm working with women, and it's a situation where, oh, I want to tone up, or I want to do this or do that, I want to look more lean, there is a decision to be made sometimes about, is this really a fat loss, weight loss goal, or is it actually a muscle gain goal? Does this person actually really need to put on some muscle mass first to then maybe be able to have some fat loss later and actually get into that physique that they're talking about? Because that's often the case with women, where they're at this kind of bottom end of trying to get leaner and leaner, but their body weight's already low, and it's like, this is not going to happen unless there's actually some more muscle mass there, and all the time they're eating less and less, that's never going to happen. And so again, even if you are working with a coach who's telling you all the right things for fat loss and weight loss, if that's not actually the right thing you should be doing, then you're not going to get the result. So again, it's trying to spot that, obviously, and explain, because sometimes that's a hard thing to get buy-in on when someone's always been trying to lose weight for their goal, and you're trying to explain actually maybe there's a slightly different way of doing this. It's trying to get that buy-in, trying to be concise in the explanation of why that might be the case.
Yeah, those technical aspects of nutrition do play a massive role as well, I think. Let's now that we've covered those basics, let's launch into what we described at the beginning, which is more around narrowing in on specific goals and how nutrition might change or tweak depending on what the goal is. Now we're going to try and do something which is fairly impossible here, because we in one podcast, to be able to actually talk about this and everybody who's listening to go, oh, that's absolutely the approach for me, is not, for the reasons we've already mentioned, how individual these things are, is not possible. But I think to lay the groundwork and the foundations for the most important aspects of nutrition as they relate to particular goals, I think we can probably do that. Let's take that on. We'll see if we can do that. So let's start with health, because a lot of people trying to, are either concerned that their diet is not optimal for health. Maybe they've actually been to the doctors for something and it's sort of brought it right to the forefront of their mind. It's possible to ignore also for a lot of people for a long time, is that actually we normalize the foods we eat, even though we actually, if someone asked us whether they were healthy for us, we'd probably say, oh, my diet's not that healthy. So let's see if we can delve in for people who do want to change their diet so that it is healthier. What are those main things that we need to be focusing on?
Yeah, I think it's probably worth saying first, it's actually rare that I come into contact with a client who's coming purely for. In fact, I could probably count on one hand how many times I've had a conversation with someone where the goal is purely, I want to make sure my diet quality is on point. And interestingly, what you find with that client type is often it's pretty on point. Because I think if someone's at the stage where they're coming to a nutritionist specifically for that, they've probably already tried a lot of things and they're probably in a pretty decent place. And then at that point, honestly, for me, at that stage, the conversation drifts a bit more towards life quality and sort of perspective on all of this, versus maybe getting too in the weeds about how much the difference in the color of the berry you're eating matters that much for the quality and outcome. But that's a particular case. So generally speaking, I'm working with health alongside another goal, quite often weight loss. But your example is a good one of someone who's maybe come via the doctor with some kind of health marker which is flagged as a little bit problematic. In nearly all cases, those are also associated with being overweight. The kind of if someone comes with a vitamin deficiency, they will normally already have a recommendation from the doctor of what supplement to take for that, and then we could have a conversation around that. I would go with the doctor in terms of the supplementation if they've been recommended one, but also talk about ways in their diet they could pick up those foods, whether that's a specific foods to start bringing in, fine. But if we're generally talking about concerns about heart health, concerns about blood pressure, concerns about pre-diabetic, these kind of things, then it is normally this kind of holistic approach that we're talking about, where how can we just generally improve the quality of the diet? And for me, it's then about, again, assess where the diet is right now. Because all we're looking to do originally is move it from where it is to a better place first, and then if from there we can continue moving it to better places, great. Yeah. So in terms of what are some of those things, we'll try and do it quick, Russ, because this is the bit that's fairly straightforward. In terms of healthy eating principles, I don't think there's many people who couldn't give the similar answer that I'm going to give now, which is that we're trying to include more fruits and vegetables. We're trying to have some whole grains. We're trying to get some nuts and seeds, good fats, as we call it, okay, into the diet. And if you are doing that alongside a reasonable protein intake, if you're not actually resistance training, trying to build muscle, we don't need to go crazy on this protein thing. But the parameters for what we can constitute as a healthy diet, by just looking around the world at different blue zones, different areas where healthy diet exists, it is quite broad. We've got some parts of the world where carbohydrate intake is quite high. We've got some parts where it's quite low. But what we're seeing is those parameters of generally less processed food, more fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, whole grains. This is where we're trying to move towards.
Just for people listening who aren't aware of what the kind of blue zones are, could you explain?
So again, I think it's a term that's used a little bit more widely than it should, but it's essentially, there was a particular study done where they were looking at areas that have the best quality of life in terms of health outcomes and also longevity of life, particularly that one in terms of where people are living the longest. So that the Mediterranean diet is a common one of areas where people are doing well. But you've also got places all around the world, even in kind of East Asia as well. The diet is quite different when it's more, carbohydrate heavy. And then you've got a lot of areas like places in America where it's a little bit more, the particular Christian kind of sect, if that's the right word there, where it's all very plant-based foods. So often that's another theme that you see, that plant-based diets appear quite high in this kind of longevity and health outcomes. Obviously nowadays there's lots of pushing for plant-based diets, which is great. The message from me on that would be, I'm all for it, because generally increasing the plants in your diet is going to improve the quality. What we often see in these studies, though, is that the reason people are getting better health outcomes from this is because they're eating more vegetables and plants, not necessarily because they're eating less meat. Does that make sense? So it's that subtle difference where between the thing that is better is the more vegetables and plants, which you could do alongside still eating meat. But typically what's happening is they're taking people from diets that are processed food, hamburgers, hot dogs, this kind of thing, and then switching to plant-based diet, the quality will improve. But equally, if they switched from hamburgers, hot dogs, and Twinkies over to, steak alongside a really high plant-based diet, you'd also expect to see similar health outcomes.
Interesting around those blue zones, isn't it? Because I think the diets may generally trend towards something slightly different depending on the local cuisine and maybe what's even available in those areas. There are so many other factors that you see in some of those epidemiological studies looking at large numbers of people and incident rates of disease and ill health, as well as health and longevity. And you see that there are other factors that play a massive role. So, things like pollution, urban life just seems to always have a negative impact on people's overall health and well-being. And it could be I suppose the temptation is to go, oh well, if I'm living in if the city I live in or the area I live in is going to have more of an impact on my health, then what's the point in trying to, what difference are these seeds and nuts going to make? I think I would probably go the other way, which is that it's even more important if you live in a city, urban life, you drive a car, all of these things that make us more sedentary, make our food more readily available, processed food that starts to partly digest foods for us, or package amount of salt in there that we wouldn't naturally find. All of those aspects and more, being around pubs and places to go drinking alcohol, caffeine. There are so many things that might contribute that actually we should be making more of an effort with our diet. Yeah. To actually use that as a tool to combat living in areas where otherwise lots of other things are deleterious to our health.
You're absolutely right about that. Some of it is quite fascinating, but you often get this with these kind of large scale studies that are looking at populations, where I believe a lot of the correlations there are things like, firstly, vitamin D, the Mediterranean diet, these people are out in the sun, more in terms of that correlation, but also things like sense of community, almost religious to an extent, people that are in that environment. Now, it would probably be unscientific to suggest that if you join the local church, but it's more this association of that style of living that is perhaps less stressful, a little bit more focused on community rather than this sort of being chained to the desk, working, stress level high, caffeine, kind of buzzing around. There's some of the intangibles to it that when you look at it on a broad scale, we go, okay, why are we seeing that here versus here? Now, to your point, do you throw the baby out with the bathwater and go, well, I can't do all of that, so why bother? No, it's just more important to focus on things you are in control of, for sure. But I guess in the interest of keeping it concise, my general message with this is moving towards a healthy diet is not rocket science at all, and it only feels like it because of the very specific, very sort of warring factions of diet healthy information that's all over social media and the media generally. So when I'm talking to someone, and I've encountered this quite a lot more recently, I'll be talking to people that are very in their own heads about the quality of some of the foods they're eating. Like, but I shouldn't be eating this because this is reduced fat, and that's bad for you. And I should be having this, but I think I'm worried about the sugar in these berries or fruits or stuff. But then it's like, at the same time, there's alcohol in that diet, and there's 2 or 3 nights a week where it'll be a pub lunch or binging on sweets or something like that. And for me, that's then just this misapplication of all of this is creating more of a problem, because you're stressing about things that don't really matter, and then you're missing the areas of your diet that really actually could do with addressing. Again, it's not to be too reductionist with it, but I often do think if someone is drinking a reasonable amount of alcohol, which most people's perception of what a reasonable amount of alcohol is still over the guideline number of units a week, that should really be the first area you're looking at in terms of improving health, more so than what's going on in the diet.
Yeah, where's the biggest window of opportunity for change, I suppose. What's the low-hanging fruit is a phrase you use regularly. In this particular instance. Just before we leave health and go on to weight loss, if it's simple, I suppose what I can kind of hear people saying is, if it is simple, and I think there isn't, the fact that we all minimise, you hear this language all the time, minimise the foods that we think are not healthy. So, it was only a glass of wine, it was only half a Twix. So there's always a lot of minimising things that we're sort of aware are probably not the best foods for our health, and then overemphasising the description of aspects of our diet that we are happy with is healthy. So, conversations that make me smile around nutrition are always, so how's the diet going? Oh, breakfast is great. Because at breakfast it's always fairly consistent, and actually I'm in my right mind and I haven't been distracted or tired by the day. And then in the evening, I just had one glass of wine. There's an immediate desire to want to minimise. So I think if we, as in the audience and myself, know that actually what the foods are that we should be eating for better health, why are we not doing it? Is the big question. And that, I think, is a much harder one to potentially to wrap up.
Well, I thought you were almost going to give me an easy in there.
No, not at all.
To give you an example of maybe what I mean by what a healthy diet might look like.
Let's do that.
I'll do that, and then I'll come back, Russ, to that very good question there. So here's the way I'd put it, and I'm speaking for myself here, because there are other nutritionists who are all about the nth degree of quality. Now, whether I think that's right or wrong, there could be someone else here who would go, I wouldn't be happy with someone eating any less than X, Y, or Z. For me, if someone's diet looks something like this, I would say I'm not in the business of trying to change this too much. If someone is having something for breakfast that might be, let's say, some Greek yogurt with some berries, a little bit of flaxseed in there. Okay, and then at lunch they're going to the local salad place near where they work, and they're getting a bit of rice, some vegetables in there, a bit of chicken or fish or something like that. They're snacking on some nuts and fruit throughout the day, a little bit of dark chocolate or something before bed, and then their dinner at home is, again, fish, chicken, beef, something like that, cooked up with whatever seasoning, spices you want, whatever. Again, some kind of carbohydrate, whether it's potatoes or rice or some pasta, providing the quantity is appropriate for the goal, and some vegetables with that. I'm very, very, very happy with that. And in my experience of working with hundreds of people, that kind of diet, for most people, you would need more leeway than that, for maybe the reasons we'll get into. Because when I'm saying that now, I hope people maybe are thinking and going, oh, dark chocolate, because to me, it almost, even that sounds a little bit unrealistically clean for a lot of people. But when you actually piece that down, it's not asking too much, because I've really not been specific there about that dinner. It's meat and 2 veg with a carbohydrate of your choice. It's more about portions with that, so the pasta doesn't end up, twice the size that we'd like for the portion size. These other things, it's not you've got a meal prep and bring your lunch in. There's plenty of great places, certainly around where we are in the city, but there's plenty of great places where you can get a lunch on the go. And again, if you're living somewhere where you're not, then fair enough, that might be a case of having to prepare that. So that would, for me, be fantastic. I would say more holistically for someone, where I've mentioned there about those snacks and some nuts and fruit and dark chocolate, I would there invoke the sort of 80-20% rule, which is that if your snacks have the propensity to be on a spectrum where some days they lean more towards nuts and fruits and maybe a protein yogurt. And then on another day, it might be grabbing a croissant with someone that you're catching up with in a work meeting, or having a bit of chocolate or something. That's okay.
Yeah, I think it's worth pointing out the reason that is okay is because there are plenty of examples of individuals who do exactly that. They follow the diet you described originally 90% of their time, and occasionally they have the sort of stuff that people would be terrified is terrible for your health, and they have good biomarkers of health. They're lean and they're living their best life. And I think that's the important thing to recognise, is that what you've said there is the overzealous, overly concerned, slightly neurotic approach to sort of micromanaging a diet, which actually has got some glaring gaps in it that could be taken. That's not really the way to go. I just add this so that when you do get onto it, and then I'll let you carry on if you want to do more, is I would just stress, in terms of why people aren't potentially sticking to that kind of diet, environment plays an enormous role. It is not all down to the individual. But we can double back onto that if you've got more to add on there.
I think that is almost a good way to segue into it. I'm just thinking if there's anything out. Yeah, maybe one just other thing I would add to this whole collective there, because where I was making that exception there for, the snacks maybe a bit more flexible around those kind of things, that actually does apply to any of those meals in the day. It might be that, okay, lunch was in a hurry, so I grabbed a sandwich or something. It's like this, swapping the grainy salad or something for a sandwich couple of times a week is not going to do much. If it's a day where the breakfast got swapped for a croissant, the lunch got swapped for a sandwich, there was chocolate, the dinner ended up being a ready meal, you might go, okay, quality was poor that day, let's try not to keep doing that. But really, any of those meals ultimately could be swapped out for something that's not quite as high value, but because the rest of your day is still high, you're still getting a fairly complete picture. The important message with this is this: when we talk about what's a healthy diet and what isn't, it's far less because having a croissant in itself is particularly bad for you. It's more that when you're having that 300 calories of croissant that's only really giving you some fats and carbs and not really any nutrients, any micronutrients, you're missing a nice window of opportunity there to be getting more good quality nutrients. So if your diet is high in processed food, either you're going to just be gaining weight because you're eating tons of it and healthy food as well, but more often what happens is people are eating a sensible amount of calories, just say, but if it's all processed food, they're not eating healthy stuff. It's the not eating healthy stuff, a bit like the meat analogy we were making earlier. It's the not eating healthy stuff. So if your diet is largely healthy and you end up just swapping another healthy snack out for a bit of a chocolate bar, it's not suddenly going to undo the work of the rest of the diet. And equally, you could extend that to one day at the weekend, a little bit off-piste. Okay, it's fine. Yeah. So that would be my kind of views on what I would class as parameters of still good quality eating. Others would certainly say to me, no, you've got to do this, this, and this. For me, I think that falls more into the kind of potential leanings towards things like orthorexia and these kind of things, where if your mind is fixated on too much detail on this, I think that starts to tip the other way in terms of like quality. So why is it so hard? You mentioned environment. That it's the same sort of route I was going to go down, which is that there's that expression of like a kid in a candy shop. That is how we live in society now, which is that anywhere you go, we have purposely designed products that are very high in sugar and fat, which we know is a combination that makes our brains very happy, makes us want to overeat. They're not feeling incredibly high calorie, and they're everywhere. When you go to a restaurant, meals that at home you could make at a sensible kind of calorie value are covered in oils and butter and sugars and everything that makes them taste really great, which is why we like eating out, but the calorie density is just super high. So when we are functioning in normal society, if you are already perhaps predisposed to having a higher appetite or these kind of things, what we'd call someone who's predisposed to being obese, it's very likely you'll become obese in this society because of the readily accessible foods that are designed to make you want to eat them, that are everywhere.
Yeah, I think it's a good message, because it can be really tempting, I think, to take. It's that strange juxtaposition between you want to take responsibility over your diet, but you don't need to take responsibility for all of the blame for why you do the things you do. We behave in ways that are influenced by our environment all the time without realizing, and food is probably one of the most exposed and exploited behaviors that we have by the environment around us, by advertisers, and by big companies who are trying to sell us things. So I think it's just, without getting into the weeds of that too much, I think it's an important message, because it does just make us feel a little bit less, okay, we can take a nice deep breath and say, okay, there are some things that I can control here. I'm going to listen to Dan. I'm going to follow that nutritional advice. I'm going to try and move towards vegetables, fruits, whole foods, and that diet structure you suggested. But if and when those things are not absolutely aligned with that, I have to understand that, one, that's okay, and two, it's actually a product of where I live, the times we live in, and my environment,
and your brain as well. This is the thing. It's fairly insidious in that we understand the way the brain works. We understand that we weren't always in these environments, and that sugar, readily available calories, are what we're drawn towards, and that these products are created and shoved at us. There's a lot of times with clients I've had to, over time, try and reinforce to them they don't have a problem. They're not an inherently bad person because they feel they have this addiction to sugar, or I wish I didn't love these sugary, fatty foods so much. It's like, you're not unique in this. I love sugary food and that stuff as much as the next person. And some people will have a higher propensity than me for it. Some people do genuinely not like that stuff, and that's absolutely fine. But it's kind of to your point about the blue zones. If that's not you, and you're someone who is drawn to those foods, that's the situation that you're in. And we need to work within that. We need to understand that maybe it's best for you to have a little bit of it, but build your diet around more kind of sustaining things. Or, there's a myriad of strategies, but it's not, the right answer is not going, there's something fundamentally wrong with me.
Yeah, very well put. All right, let's move on to weight loss then. And I think if we manage to do justice to health, nutrition, and weight loss nutrition within the same podcast episode, I think we've done a very good job. And a spin-off of, I think, this conversation will be lots of more detailed conversations, which I'm sure, get stuck in the comments and send us messages if you have specific things around nutrition that you would like Dan to cover, because there is so much nuance to this. But let's turn our attention towards weight loss. If you are trying to lose weight, same questions we had with health really, what are the main things that you're trying to or should be focusing on with your food, with your diet?
Yeah, so top line, if you're currently maintaining your weight, then the calorie intake of your diet, whatever its constitution is currently appropriate for weight maintenance. And to lose weight, it needs to come lower than where it is. So that's the top line. So the way I approach this is sit down, go through what's happening currently. Good days, bad days, weekends, normal days. Get a whole map of the area, and then go in, I might call it like with a comb almost, and I'm just trying to comb off the top enough of a calorie reduction in order to be in the position to lose weight. And again, normally for a short period of time. And then after that, we'll focus on increasing calories again to the right level to maintain that. So that's the approach. It dovetails a little with healthy eating for sure, because everything we've kind of touched on there in terms of eating more vegetables, more sort of food volume, lower calorie food volume there, more fiber, higher protein intake, less processed food. All of that sets you up in a position where you're going to have a more satiating diet, and your energy level is going to be a bit more balanced throughout the day. So that's great. That's good stuff for weight loss, because now you're going to be less hungry. Okay, but then at the same time, if we're taking away all the foods that you enjoy, and again, shoehorning you into some kind of clean eating approach, which looks nothing like your existing diet, it's not going to last very long for weight loss. And this is the biggest mistake people make, is they decide to take on both weight loss and impeccably clean eating at the same time. It's just far too much at once. Calories are probably too low, and then we do a week or so of that, give up, and then it doesn't work.
Because what you do hear a lot around weight loss online in terms of the advice is that, calories in, calories out thing. And I think it is relevant and important to mention that it does, and I think that's a really nice phrase actually, it does dovetail with healthy eating. But you do see sometimes I'm eating healthier, so I'm not losing weight. So I've switched over onto these types of healthy foods, but I'm actually not seeing weight loss. So while they dovetail, they're not the same, because it's possible, as you mentioned there, to, instead of combing off the top, as you say, it's a nice analogy, instead of combing off the top the sort of excess calories, it's possible for those foods that we would categorize as healthy to also be high calorie, and therefore, if you include enough of them in the diet, to mitigate weight loss.
That is possible. What I tend to see is this is normally a product of just a misapplication of attention in the areas that matter, because what will often happen is that it's very rare that I meet someone in truth where there isn't an aspect of the diet that could be changed, which is not only going to decrease the calorie intake, but would also probably improve the quality of the diet, not take away from the quality of the diet, let's put it that way. So normally, most people will have a level of either social calories of restaurant food, alcohol, or snacking in the form of things that are maybe, crisps, chocolate, these kind of things. That, in an ideal world, would be the area that you take from, obviously, because it's the lowest quality stuff in the diet. And in the case of alcohol, it's actually negative. So that's where we'd take from. Where this question about healthy foods being a problem for weight loss, it is possible that someone's having too many nuts and too much avocado and stuff, but it's quite rare that would be the main issue, because just by the nature of those foods, they tend to be kind of filling in a protein shake or the quantity of nuts and things that you're having. Because if you're having to buffer this stuff up, the social calories, and you're eating really high calorie, nutrient dense, healthy foods, we might lose the right to have both. And while I'd rather you stop drinking and eating in restaurants, if that's a non-negotiable for sustainability, we may start to skimp on that. It's the conversation I have a lot about full-fat dairy. When people, wow, why am I eating low-fat dairy? Isn't that good for you and stuff? And it's like, again, if you want to not have the pints on the weekend, then yeah, let's do it. But if those have to stay, it probably just makes sense to shave. Okay, can we swap this for something a bit lower calorie?
Because you mentioned a few times there, you mentioned sort of swapping things, and I think that's a really important. I don't know whether it's a skill or just a sort of concept to kind of get in, fix in your mind, because that can be a really simple way of distilling down, what you would do with clients in terms of when you look at your diet, there are certain substitutions that you can make.
Yeah, it's a budget at the end of the day, really, and. You made a good point earlier about this thing with the calories in and calories out, and people will kick back against that. And I think the best way because often when we look at it from a budget sense, you get this thing, in that case, I'll just have 500 calories of minstrels for lunch rather than, right? And the thing is, I think sometimes the best way of approaching this argument is to take it to this silly degree, which is that if you were just eating 1,500 calories of minstrels as a woman, and 1,500 calories was appropriate for weight loss, would you lose weight? And the answer is, yes, you would theoretically if you were doing that. But in practice, no one could ever do that, ever. Because, maybe if you was in a lab for a short period of time and you're in the real world, because your hunger would be so high, your energy levels would be so low. Over time as well, your health would suffer from that. You become deficient in many different nutrients, and you would eventually fall off with that. So it doesn't work. Right, and then so all we do is we take it from there up to, well, how good would a diet do if one of the meals had some vegetables and the rest of it was minstrels? It's probably wouldn't do very well. And then you take that all the way up to what is a decent level? What's a good trade-off between, sort of just whatever works for the calories versus eating healthy, nutritious food? And the answer is there's probably a bit of a sweet spot somewhere, but it will differ for different people. Yeah. And the more we go towards things that are sort of practical in terms of the physiology, i.e. healthy foods, the better for satiety and the kind of physiology side of things, the more we veer towards preference, which isn't always sweets and chocolate. Hopefully there's a mix where people want to eat some healthy things too. The more we lean towards preference, the more we're going to be able to sustain it. So that sweet spot is always what we're after.
In terms of what is, because you mentioned it also there's sustainability, and mainly from up until this point in terms of sort of food selection. So having some of the foods in the diet that make it possible to go and socialise without worrying too much about it, or make it possible to have some foods while you're adjusting to maybe having a higher proportion of healthy foods in your diet, it's possible to also have some of the things that you're still using in other ways, still getting something else from other than purely just fuel. But in terms of sustainability, from how much of a drop in calories from that maintenance level that you mentioned is realistic, and what do you often recommend? Because I think that sometimes can be, dropping that too low can then make it too difficult to stick to the diet, even if actually the food selection is pretty good.
Yep. This is an area where, again, I have my approach with this, which we discuss this a lot. You kind of learn about things and then you do it for a long time and you come to your own decisions about things. You can get very lost in the numbers of, okay, let's say 0.5 kilo a week is typically a sustainable rate of weight loss. Okay, so for someone who is a heavier person, so say the heavier you are, the higher your maintenance calorie intake will be. So say you're a woman who's heavier, that could even be a figure around 2,000 calories. In truth, it could even be that high. If you're a petite woman and you're fairly sedentary and you're trying to lose weight at 0.5 kilo a week, then that will give you these kind of numbers of 1,100 calories, 1,000 calories, this kind of stuff, which for me is unsustainable. So for that individual, we would have to do one or two things: either look to increase the activity level quite significantly first, so they could lose weight at a more sustainable calorie intake, or just pursue weight loss at a slower rate, so 0.25 kilos a week. What I've arrived at myself with this is that somewhere around 1,500 calories for women, and slightly different conversation for men, as in it will be higher, but it's maybe not quite as tight as this, but somewhere around 1,500 calories tends to be sensible for most women. And the reason for that is, if you are more overweight, so in that scenario I suggested there, where if you're quite overweight, you may be able to lose weight as a woman, even eating 2,000 calories a day. That would be for 0.5 kilo a week. You could probably eat 1,500 and lose a kilo a week, because in that position, that rate of weight loss would be fine. To lose, when you are of that size, that rate of weight loss is typically recommended, actually, about a kilo a week. You would still be able to get all the nutrient quality you needed on 1,500 calories. You'd still be able to get a good amount of protein, and there's still flexibility in that diet for some social stuff and some snacks. So 1,500, if it was tough to stick to that, we could go to 1,700. It would just slow that rate of weight loss, but it'd still be pretty quick. If you are a petite woman and you're getting back numbers that are very low like that on like a calorie calculator where it's 1,100 or less or something, it's probably because you're not very heavy to begin with, right? Because a smaller body is going to burn less calories at rest. So it also means you have less weight ultimately to lose to get to your goal weight. And so because of that, we're happier with a slower rate of weight loss. So then if we're doing 1,500 calories in that case, and that's only going to produce 0.25 kilos of weight loss a week, that's fine, because we can still do 1,500, still sustainable, still getting all your micronutrients, still having some social wiggle room there. We're just going to go slow and steady with it, right? So for me, that sweet spot of 1,500 is because it's about as low as we can go, in my opinion, while still being sustainable. And if you have more weight to lose, you'll just lose weight quicker doing that.
And what about if we spend a few minutes just talking about men, because you said that it's slightly different, perhaps?
The reason I think it's slightly different, because the principle would still apply, and you could probably say something like 2,000 calories, just because of the way things factor up a little bit. Why is it different? In truth, it's different for reasons that are more of a fact, I guess, of the people that I have worked with, and what tends to happen on population levels of people who are coming to us for coaching, which is that often, for better or worse, men are more inclined to be in the gym, whether they're lifting sensibly or not, but may have that history of plowing away with the weights, possibly being quite a bit more overweight. But when you've got this scale of, you might get a man who's 6'3", really, really heavy guy, 2,000 and doing weight training, having a good amount of muscle, 2,000 will be too low potentially. Whereas if it's a slightly smaller man, it could be lower than that. Again, it's just with women, it's almost, there's slightly less variance around the amount of muscle mass, the amount of general size, the amount of training. So it tends to be with men. I'd be less inclined to give those kind of generic figures. But in truth, it just probably means it'd be somewhere between 1,800, 2,200 as a sensible figure. And again, absolutely for women, it will vary as well. If I'm working with a professional athlete, or, you know, and in truth, there are some women I'm work with who are incredibly short, essentially, where 1,500 calories is not really going to cut it. And that's delicate. And those people I would work with on potentially lower calorie intakes than that, where we're looking quite tightly at the nutrient intakes and kind of micronutrients and protein and things like that in that one. And, you know, anyone that's working with us is always going to have a tailored intake anyway. But it's just when talking more generally to an audience, I've found over time really that 1,500 calories tends to be a sensible place for most women to start with.
Which sounds like it's somewhere between a sort of 10 or 15%. There or thereabouts.
Yeah.
Maybe a bit higher perhaps for some people. But
do you see what I mean about the thing with it is you can either go that approach by looking at percentages, or you can just go for the people.
It will be about here anyway, so this is what we aim for.
Exactly, and because the variable you look at is the speed of weight loss will change. You clamp the 1,500, and then if you're a bigger person or a more active person, you'll lose more weight following that, but you're also appropriate to do so. If you're a smaller person, you'll lose less weight doing that, quite a bit less than someone who's even like mid-range, but you probably don't need to lose as much weight, so therefore it's also appropriate.
Very succinctly put. Right, I'm conscious. I think we've done a good job of covering that. I think it's two massive topics. Hopefully you found it useful to listen to. We're, of course, going to delve into lots more of the detail around some of these nuanced bits, which I mentioned earlier, with regards to nutrition and of course, other areas of nutrition that sit outside of health and weight loss specifically. But for now, thank you very much. I enjoyed that a lot.
My pleasure.
I learned a lot. Right, I'm going to try and play us out again, and I might have remembered the jingle button this time, but maybe
Let's
not.
do it.
Let's see. Oh,
yes.
He's got it first time.
It's an original piece.
Thanks. I'll put this together myself. Thanks very much. See you next time.